Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to Episode 29, Making Woman in Motion. We'll start off with some Star Trek news.
And then we'll get into our main story, Making Woman in Motion. It's a really exciting day. We have the production team from the film Woman in Motion here to talk with us. It's going to be really cool. Stay with us. Well, this is an auspicious day, and it's not just because we have fantastic guests on the show this week. It's because of who is not our guest this week, and that would be one Michael S. Poteet. Mike, what's the deal? You're not a guest anymore.
Well, just like Wesley eventually stopped being an acting ensign and became an ensign, I'm no longer a guest co-host. You've graciously invited me to be one of your co-hosts on Gospel According to Star Trek podcast, and I'm very pleased to be here in that capacity. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. You know, we had this crisis happen where Tim needed to take a break, and I knew the two people I could call to help out were Mike and David. And they both did such a great job. Tim and I together agreed that we needed to invite you both to be on the team all the time. So those of you who are listening to the show, you've been missing Tim. I have too. He will be back. I don't know exactly how soon because we got a lot of interview stuff coming that's happening this month. And he may or may not be in on one of those, but he is definitely coming back to the show. He's definitely back behind the scenes. We're working on stuff together. He's eager to be back on the show with me, but also David is going to be part of the crew. So you're going to be hearing Mike and David and Tim and I in various combinations in a loose rotation from here on out in the podcast. And we're really excited about it. So yeah, there you have it.
I'm excited. It's going to be fun. And again, it's very gracious of you to let me into your baby, this podcast, this way. So thanks so much.
Well, it's been gracious of you and David both to come be a part of it. So we're excited. And I'll gather some laurel leaves for David when he's on next too. So, co-host Mike Poteet, you have some Star Trek news.
I do have some Star Trek news. And you can find this on many news outlets across the internets because Star Trek World is excited that some cast members for Star Trek Strange New Worlds have been announced. And of course, we already knew Anson Mount is going to play Christopher Pike, and Rebecca Romaine will be playing Number One, and Ethan Peck will be playing Spock. They were also great in those roles in Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. But now we have 5 regular cast members announced, and they are Babs Alusinamakin, Christina Chong, Celia Rose Gooding, Jess Bush, and Melissa Navia. And there's no word yet on who any of these actors will be playing, who their characters will be. But what's exciting is that they are a very diverse bunch of actors.
Yes. Black,
women, Hispanic, I believe, in heritage. Melissa Navia is Colombian-American actor.
Fantastic.
So they're not going to be playing the Lily White bridge crew we saw in The Cage. They'll be, bringing to the fore the fact that there was diversity in Starfleet in the time of Christopher Pike, and we'll be seeing that presumably. And these actors have some very impressive credits. Babs Alusinamakin, I'm mangling his name, I'm certain, but I saw him as Amuro Kinte in the 2016 remake of the Roots miniseries.
Oh, okay.
And that was a fabulous production. And he's also going to be in the new Dune movie that's coming out later this year, playing a Fremen. So I'm excited about that. And again, I haven't seen too many of the things these people are in, but at least one of them, Celia Rose Gooding, she's been on Broadway in the musical Jagged Little Pill, based on Alanis Morissette's work.
Oh, see, that's good stuff right there.
So we're getting more musical. Anytime musical theater people come to Trek, good stuff happens.
That's right. And I've seen a little bit of that Jagged Little Pill too.
Have you? How is it?
Really good. I didn't think it was going to be good, but it was really good. I just saw one song from it on the thing on television, and it was phenomenal, compelling. Really cool. So I think it's gonna be a fun show if you see it. Well, that ties in right with the piece of news I was going to bring, which is that Strange New Worlds is in production. So
yay,
hooray! We're excited for that, and I'm really excited to hear the cool new cast members coming on. That jazzes me. It's always exciting to see what new people are going to be involved in Star Trek. Who the new Star Trek is going to be. So
and whose names you'll know for the rest of your life after that.
That's right. That's
like I
right.
didn't know anybody really on Next Generation when it premiered, or any of the series, but now I could,
there are friends.
They're household names in my household.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny because, I can't think of a single time in Star Trek that a major character has been somebody I've been familiar with. I mean, I knew Brock Peters. When he showed up, I was like, yeah, nobody else in the world could play Avery Brooks' dad, but Brock Peters. That's so perfect. Like, who else comes? They're just like, yeah, it's like gravitas and gravitas. Of course, they're related. They've got to be.
Yes.
But other than that, a lot of times, you just generally don't know, and they're to the audience, and I think that's a good thing. But to the audience, they're usually unknown actors or little-known actors to most of us,
or to the Trek audience, maybe. Because I think
audience,
all these actors, I don't doubt they've got impressive credits.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they
IMDb,
have.
but they're just not familiar to me. So
they're not familiar to us nerds, and that's always fun.
I'm glad to be introduced to talent that I should know about.
Yeah.
There is some speculation that Jess Bush is going to be playing Yeoman Colt. Den of Geek is speculating that. But as I recall, there was a character credited Yeoman Colt in at the end of season 2 of Discovery, and she was an alien character.
Really?
So I don't know how they've reimagined Yeoman Colt, if they have or not. But I saw some interviews with the producers saying that was a little tip of the hat to the Cage.
Fascinating. I'm looking forward to it. And if you're out there and you're interested in the adventures of Chris Pike, and you don't want to wait for Strange New Worlds, none of us want to wait. We have all got to wait for Strange New Worlds. But there's I would commend to you a comic book series called Star Trek New Voyages.
Early Voyages.
Early Voyages,
right?
That's right. Sorry.
Yeah.
Star Trek Early Voyages, which is available from IDW as Star Trek Omnibus Volume 2, is the whole series. I will warn you that they were canceled, so it ends on a cliffhanger. But but it's really cool, and they actually have a First Nations engineer.
Yeah,
in that
they
series,
did some good things with diversity too.
Yeah, it was really cool. That was in the 90s.
I'm rereading it now. Actually, it's a good,
cool.
It's a good book, and I'm sorry it lasted as short as it did. But
I agree. Well, I would also like to say another piece of news is that the History Channel is launching a docuseries called Center Seat, all about Star Trek. So it's going to be
great.
Yeah, it's going to be a Star Trek documentary series on the History Channel. You might remember that at the 50th anniversary, the History Channel did a special called 50 Years of Star Trek. That was created by Brian Volk Weiss, who is the CEO of Nichelle Company, who made that. And so it's called Center Seat: 55 Years of Star Trek. So I'm really excited. It's an 8-part series. So it's not just the last time was a one-shot special, and this is an 8-part series. So I'm really excited about that. It's going to be very cool.
And are these the same people that did the Toys That Made Us on Netflix?
I don't know.
I think I may have seen. I can't swear to it, but if they are, they really they do fun deep dives into pop culture.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, it'll be interesting to see that. So, yeah, I'm excited about it. And then, so one more thing. This is not Star Trek news, but this is my news, and this is my show. So there you go.
So there.
I would like to announce to everybody who doesn't know about it yet the publication of a new book called The Good, the True, the Beautiful. And the reason that I want to announce this publication to you is that I'm one of its editors. I and my 3 colleagues, Mark Boone and Rose Cawthron and Jacqueline Parrish, all have worked together for nearly 3 years to compile this multi-author volume, The Good, the True, the Beautiful, a multidisciplinary tribute to Dr. David K. Naugle. And if you've read my book, The Gospel According to Star Trek, The Original Crew, that name might ring a bell for you. In the introduction of the book, I talk about going to my first philosophy class in college, my first intro to philosophy class, and listening to a lecture that changed my view of my education and how it interacted with my faith, and that sent me off to immediately, as soon as class left, I went immediately to my advisor and said, how do I change my major? And because I was just going to college to get a degree, to get a better job in video production and film. And I really didn't have anything but a utilitarian focus on education at the time. And Dr. Naugle completely revolutionized my view of what I was there for. He taught me that intellectual pursuits are necessarily spiritual pursuits. And that thing that you hear me say on the show all the time, all goodness is God's goodness, all truth is God's truth, all beauty is God's beauty. I mean, I'm just quoting Dr. Naugle right there. And I just do it all the time. That's why we chose as the title of the book, The Good, the True, the Beautiful. So I'm in it. I've got an essay in there, a piece that I wrote on the Last Temptation of Christ.
Oh, fabulous.
People might not know I'm a bit of a Jesus film nerd, and I'm probably the biggest nerd on the Last Temptation of Christ you will ever meet. And so, that's about my personal journey with the Last Temptation of Christ, how I discovered it, how it challenged me, and how it ended up becoming my favorite film because of the way it caused me to contemplate the incarnation of Christ. Cool. And there's all kinds of stuff in the book from friends and colleagues, people who love Dr. Naugle and who I love. If you're familiar with Dr. Stephen Garber, he gives the afterword. He calls Dr. Naugle the greatest professor in America. And that's high praise coming from Dr. Garber, and so he gives the afterword, which is actually a piece that he delivered at Dr. Naugle's retirement, called Be a Davy. But there's everything. I like to say there's everything in this book, from horror films to gardening, and we've even got some poetry thrown in there. So it's a really diverse. There's actually some original scholarship. There's a piece of Latin that has never been translated into English before, a Latin speech that's never been translated into English before, and there's just a lot of cool stuff in it. And I'm actually in the process of reading it to Dr. Naugle right now. So it's I highly recommend it.
What a wonderful tribute! And you were instrumental in organizing this, right?
Yeah, what happened was Dr. Naugle was retiring, and one of his former students said, hey, we should all write some papers and just put them in a notebook for him, kind of our last paper presentation to him. And we all thought that was a cool idea, but we didn't really have a lot of time before the retirement. And then we were kicking it around in a Facebook group, and we said, we really could make it a real book. And it's kind of one of those things where you're in the room and there's an idea in the middle of the room, but nobody's picking it up and doing anything with it. And so I was like, okay, fine, I'll edit the book. And so I picked it up, and the first thing I knew I had to do was get a team of editors around me, because I knew if it was just up to me, it wouldn't get done. So I invited, Rose invited herself before I could invite her even, but I would have called her anyway. And Mark and Jacqueline, I've edited with Mark before in a book that Jacqueline contributed to, and so we all knew each other. And it's great because there's I don't think any of us would all agree on points of theology, philosophy, politics, even with Dr. Naugle or with one another. And that's, I think, a great strength of the book is the diversity. So, all right, that's enough. Check it out.
Sounds good. Sounds good. It's a Festschrift, right? That's the word.
That's what they call it. Yeah. I've avoided using that word because people outside of academia usually don't know what that means. But
but you've just defined it, so now we can use it.
Now we can use it. Yeah, there you go. All right. Let's get into our main story, shall we?
Absolutely.
Folks, actually, Mike and I have already had this conversation as we're recording this. You are about to hear a great interview. This is a conversation between me and Mike and the production team from the film Woman in Motion. Those of you who've been listening lately know that Mike and I reviewed the film a while back. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It is available on iTunes, and I suggest you do it on iTunes because you get a cool making of feature. You will see some of the people who we're talking to today, both in the film and in the making of features. It's just a great movie, and we have David Teek, who is a writer and producer for the film, who is one of the people who helped make it happen originally. We have the director, who is also a producer, Todd Thompson. We have a producer, Tim Franta, is also on the show. And we have Greg Galloway, who's an attorney and producer on the project. We also had a drop-in from Benjamin Crump, who many of you might know as a very well-known civil rights attorney. He dropped in for about 15 minutes of the conversation, and we got as much wonderful stuff from him as we could while he was around. So it's a heck of a conversation. It was a heck of a time, and we're excited to bring it to you.
It is an incredible conversation, and I'm silent through most of it, not because I'm not finding it engaging or absorbing. I'm just paying such close attention, and they're answering all my questions before I can ask them. And, they're such a talented group of people, and you will be so impressed by the passion they have for this project. I mean, this is not just somebody cranking out a movie to make a buck. I mean, this is a real work of love for Nichelle Nichols and what she did and what she represents. And Kevin, you even got into some good theology with our guests too, or they got into it with you.
That's right. They sure did. So that's great. So we hope you enjoy the conversation. Let's let it roll. Today, we have with us the production team, part of the production team from Woman in Motion, which if you were listening the last time Mike and I were on here together, we reviewed that film quite enthusiastically. And so we are on. We've got, I guess everybody want to say your names, just say hello. David Teek, who is the writer-producer for the film.
Hey, good to see everybody.
And then we've got Greg Galloway, who is executive producer and production counsel.
Hey, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And then we got Todd Thompson, who is the director of the film and also a producer.
Hey, salutations.
Live long and prosper. Glad you're here. So we enjoyed the film so much. And Dave, I want to thank you for reaching out to me and Mike and listening to our episode. We appreciate you bringing everybody on here. So that's fantastic. And you really
my pleasure.
Yeah. And you really kind of got the ball rolling on this show. You started Woman in Motion. Well,
I think I had, I had an initial concept about doing a science center exhibit in and around the 50th anniversary of Star Trek that would tie together sort of how NASA and Star Trek had interplayed, both in terms of defining a future history, but also the social impacts. But Tim Franta, who may be joining us, mentioned that to Todd Thompson, and he said, that sounds like it'd be a really interesting movie. So it was really Todd's inspiration and vision to try to take this from something that would be static displays to light, sound, and action.
Oh, that's fantastic! And how did you all come upon Nichelle's story?
Well, I grew up on the Space Coast area. Actually, started the Space Coast Star Trek fan club in the early '70s when I was in middle school, high school, and let me just say, being a nerd was not as cool then as it was now. So, kind of continue with my fandom, sort of, one of my friends commented to a reporter, yes, we'll still show up on opening night for the films, but we don't wear uniforms anymore. So it was kind of that sort of thing. But I'd been generally familiar with Nichelle's involvement with NASA and recruitment. Didn't really understand how deep it was and how much work she had done and how much intentionality was behind it until we got into the serious research for this project. But, that was something was an idea that I always thought was worth exploring in whatever venue. And so that's kind of how the conversation started. I did actually had the opportunity to be up on the VIP section for the final launch of Atlantis, which is featured in the movie, and Nichelle was there, and I got to chat with her for about 5 minutes. And that was very pleasant, and thanked her for what she had done, but I really didn't understand all of what it was at that time, and got my selfie and then got out of her way because I didn't want to be that guy.
Right. Right. Well, Todd, was it the idea of Star Trek and NASA generally, or was it specifically Nichelle's story that you thought this should be a movie?
Well, I remember the story a little differently. Like Dave said, Tim called me and I had the idea for a movie. I remember it more as like a direct order from the bridge saying, we're making the movie and we're going to do it by this time. They were super excited about it. I mean, it was November of, I remember specifically, it was like November of 2014. I came home from a long day at the office, if you will. And I remember Tim calling in with Dave already on the phone. And they were just extremely excited to kind of pitch this idea about doing a film about Nichelle and about, how she transitioned from Star Trek into, science fiction to science fact. And I just, it took maybe like 5 minutes for me to be on board because it's just such a amazing hero's journey, if you will. I'm a sucker for a good story, and the journey she went on to accomplish this goal, was pretty mind blowing and unknown to me. And then later on we find out unknown to a lot of people, which is really great. So it's it's really kind of a discovery film when you think about it.
Yeah, it's always great, especially when you're doing documentary work. It's always great to be able to find a story that's really exciting and really fascinating and important, but that not a lot of people know about. So
Yeah, totally. So it's kind of an eye opener and it's refreshing. There's so many movies that are being remade and made again. And it's nice to come upon such a fresh idea that as it turns out, is a true piece of history as well. So it's kind of a double bonus.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And just, by the way, I mean, it's that what you're saying right there, that you remember things differently. I mean, how you remember it is how it got edited into the making of things. So that was the story I knew.
It's now the definitive version.
It's now the definitive.
Oh, and this is Greg speaking.
Yes,
They're
sir.
leaving out the fact that I was Tim Franta's lawyer then and Todd's lawyer. I met Dave through Tim, and they said they were looking to make this movie. I said, you should involve Todd, and I hooked them both together. So let's not skip all the way over that.
Wait, hold on. But Greg, you actually have that story wrong too, because you connected us on a different project.
That's right.
So
See, I can't even remember the best part of that.
Yeah, we're working on another project together, and Star Trek blossomed out of that. So we're still in the midst of that other project, believe it or not. But Star Trek took front and center.
So in the true Star Trek tradition, the canon is completely messed up.
This is like a family therapy session. We're all getting it on the table.
That's the truth. I tell you, if there's one thing I know about movie production stories, is that everybody has a different version.
That's right.
It's just because it's such a collaborative place, and so many things happen over such a long period of time to get a movie made. That and the memories change and morph and fade, and people don't want to take credit for stuff. People do want to take credit for stuff. So yeah, I get it. It's but we'll not try to put anything too solidly in stone, just in case. But so it was a lot of years. I mean, you're talking back in November 2014 when the idea started. When do you get into like pre-production?
Writing. Task number one was contacting Nichelle and getting her on board. Obviously, it was number one priority, and that happened. I want to say it was like around February or March of 15, and then and Dave, keep me honest here, but I think Leonard Nimoy passed away that May.
No, it was Michael Connelly brought the story treatment into her. Michael was her publicist at the time, and he was the one we talked with. And the weekend after Leonard passed, he came to her house, brought her a bunch of flowers, brought her the story treatment. She read it, and and her comment apparently at the time was, "Why aren't my people bringing me stuff like this?"
Wow.
So she the story treatment was something that it took us several months to hammer out. I had pulled different pieces of research and clips from articles and books, and we were in that period of time able to secure the NASA report, which actually took getting a congressman to call NASA Legislative Affairs to say, hey, find this report for these people and get them a copy. That was actually Representative Posey from the Space Coast, who, thank you, Bill, for doing that. So I kind of had this, pages of clips and facts, and Todd said, okay, we need to turn this into the story. It needs to have a beginning, middle, and end. Here's the kind of things that need to happen along the way. So, that was kind of, really Todd's creative vision, and particularly coming out of the Disney storyteller tradition, which, you can feel is infused in the film about the hero's journey, and that, not just having having the laying out a bunch of facts in sort of a dispassionate way, but showing somebody's journey, the highs and the lows along the way, who helped her, the obstacles they overcame, and structuring that way. So while it is a documentary, you can really, when you look at it, you see it's kind of structured like a story, with a lot of storytelling ideas behind it.
Yeah. I mean, it's structured, in the traditional format of a standard like feature film, if you will, because we were all pretty much, I was, as Dave said, I'm kind of coming from the Disney mindset of edutainment. Most documentaries are educational and they teach you something. We wanted that, of course, but we took the approach of edutainment, where we wanted to entertain as well, almost equally as important. So there's certain story beats that I'm very familiar with in the feature film world, that as a writer and director, that I know are important and tried and true. And so we took all of Dave's research and all the information we were able to find, from November until February, March, whatever it was, and we took that time to really put this thing into some sort of structure that made sense, that had a beginning, middle, and end, and kept you on the edge of your seat, if you will. Had a lot of twists and turns along the way, and luckily, I mean, her story just naturally fit that mold. It was work, but it was fun work, because we didn't have to fabricate or create anything. It really just played out very nicely.
Yeah, the real issue was finding, particularly with the 70s, and things were, everybody wasn't running around with a camera at the time, being able to either interview people that were part of the activity at the time and could speak of it in a direct first person way, or find archival footage that showed what she was doing. And that was the other part of the challenge.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to ask about. When I was watching the special features, your editor was on there, and he was talking about these boxes and boxes of hard drives and film reels, and video cassette tapes. And the question that came to my mind was, who put those boxes together?
It was a team effort for sure. But I mean, Dave did a lot of, uncovering, in Nichelle's garage, different universities around the country. A lot of it are Vince Scura, who is our archival producer. He can't join us this evening, but he did a lot of research on the web. Tim pulled a lot from NASA, so it was just definitely a team effort. But it was just a boatload of stuff that, in my mind is so daunting. And so when you talk about the editing process, there's definitely a talent just from an editing perspective. You got to be a certain mindset, a certain creative to be able to pull that off.
Yeah. Well, and we've been talking all this time about how everybody involved in the production has a different version of the story, and you mentioned Tim, and it's timely because I've just noticed Tim coming on to our call here. Tim Franta. Tim,
hello.
Hi, how are you?
Very well.
Good. I'm glad you're here. Could you we were just talking about how this all got started. Could you just kind of introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Tim Franta, and Todd and I have the same entertainment attorney, and he introduced us about 6 years ago, and we started working on another project, which, by the way, is now coming to fruition.
Great.
And that project got killed or delayed because Florida killed the film tax incentive.
Oh, wow.
And Todd literally said, we need something else to do. And I said, well, my friend Dave Teek has this great story about Nichelle Nichols. So I roughly told him the story, and then we got Dave on the phone. And so that's kind of how that started.
Well, Greg, your version of history is largely vindicated there.
Yes.
That's why he's the lawyer.
That's why he's the lawyer.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, keeps us all honest, or at least out of jail.
We feel so validated now. Now we know it's all true.
That's good.
Well, and I wanted to add, since you mentioned me,
Yes, please.
that it was and still is critically important to this team that we have Nichelle's endorsement and cooperation and her resource. She's the resource for this story, obviously, because it's mostly about her. And she could not have been more generous with us. And the interviews you see that we did with her that were contemporaneous, 2015, 2016, that time period, are clearly, just to me at least, wonderful. I think my partners did a great job with the question and answer part, but mainly she welcomed us into her home and she showed us her archives and the things that she had saved, and it was really generous. And we wanted a story that was authorized, that was authentic, and we had no interest in doing anything that wouldn't make her proud. So we're grateful for that. We really are.
Yeah, I love the honor and the respect that everybody in the production has for Nichelle is so clear in the film. It comes across not just in the way it's edited and the way the story is structured, the way everything is told, but the care with which all of that is done. And in those interview segments that you all produced, the attention to her, to giving her that space that she needs to tell her story in her way. You know, she never feels rushed. It never feels packaged. It's very natural. It's very real, and it's honest. And I think that's one of the things that makes the film connect on an emotional level so strongly, is that we see her in these more official capacities in these NASA videos. But I think the footage that you were able to capture, and some of the footage that you found from that 1989 interview, for instance, are just great. It just feels like sitting down with Nichelle and talking about her life, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I was just amazed at her ability to just recollect so many little details. I mean, I have trouble, thinking about what I did 2 days ago, let alone, 40 years ago, whatever, how long it's been. But
right.
Like her attention to detail was so impressive. And then, when we took the creative approach of, merging her life story from various different sit downs, from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and then the 90s later on. And then of course, what we shot, she's so consistent, and it's like, she literally tells you this story of her life throughout various chapters of her life. And that's what I just love so much about the way it was all put together, the way it all turned out. Oh, Ben's on the phone.
Oh, Ben, please tell everybody who's listening how you are connected to this project.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ben Crump. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I'm connected to the Women in Motion project as a writer and an executive producer. And I'm just thrilled to work with such a fine team of documentary filmmakers as Todd Thompson, David Teek, Tim Franta, and Greg Galloway. It really, really was one of the best things I've ever done in life.
Well, that's a big deal, because you've done a lot of pretty impressive things in your life. So that says a lot. And I think the story that is told in this film is such an important one. Tell us how you what attracted you to the project and why you so enthusiastically became involved.
Certainly. I will tell you this. When David first approached me and he was talking about Nichelle Nichols, I knew her as Lieutenant Uhura, but what I did not know was not only did she blaze trails as a pioneer for women and minorities in Hollywood, being the first Black woman prominently featured in primetime television on one of the top shows in America, but also that she was a trailblazer in recruiting the first women and minorities into the NASA space program, and that she was more than just a pretty face, but she was a civil rights icon. And naturally, that being my life's mission to try to advance the cause for equality and justice for all people, he had me sold at that point because I was fascinated then that she sacrificed her time and energy to open the door for others. Isn't that what life is really about when you think about it? Trying to uplift each other, use whatever blessings you have and try to make a blessing for others. And that's what attracted me to this, because you saw this woman who was an absolute force of nature, doing everything she can to make the future bright for everybody.
So one of the things, and I'm just going to, hijack the podcast host duties here. As this is the gospel according to Star Trek, that podcast that looks into what are the spiritual, humanistic, and inspirational activities.
It's about to go there, Dave. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's okay. I grabbed the talking stick. I got it. It's like, hey, welcome to the rest of these guys' world. They're used to it by now. But one of the things I sent to the host was, in a note talking about who we were, says the two most spiritual people on our team are the two lawyers, Ben Crump, who's deeply grounded in the African American church tradition, and Greg Galloway, who's actually a pastor at his Baptist church as his not his day job. And so while we have been on, it might be worthwhile to kind of dive into those implications of the film and what meaning you think we can pull out of that.
Yes, that is exactly where I was about to head. So, good radar there, David. So coming back to that, yes, this is the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. And I mean, one of the ways that we see the gospel reflected in Star Trek is that it does address those things about inclusivity and about diversity which is really about the dignity of human people, right? And the reason people have that dignity is because they are the imago Dei, the image of God. They're created in the image of God. We are here to bear the image of God to one another, and we do that by showing love to one another. So I feel like for our lawyers, particularly here, I think that probably is a big part of why you do what you do.
Well, it would not be me being genuine if I did not at least tie it to some of the things that are happening in America today. Mm-hmm. When Nichelle talked about where are my people, it really was a proclamation saying that we deserve to be in the future also, that you can't treat us in the future like you treated us in the present day. And she was talking about in the 1960s, early 70s, where discrimination was even more prevalent than it is today in America. Some would argue not much has changed, but I believe that because of people like Nichelle Nichols, we have made progress. And the fact that, as I think about George Floyd's trial that's going on in America, where over 50 million people watched the video of him being denied any kind of respect, any type of consideration, and most of all, any kind of humanity, when a police officer tortured him to death for 8 minutes and 46 seconds with his knee on his neck. It makes you think about what Nichelle was saying, that, the future is for all of us. But because this police officer, I believe with ill will in his heart, decided that George did not have to be in the future. It was irrelevant that his life didn't matter. That's what we're fighting. And I think Star Trek on so many levels, when we look at this documentary, and I love how Todd made that a big focus, the diversity on the bridge, the fact that you had everybody represented because everybody's life matters. And, you know, it's with a heavy heart. I remember George Floyd and saying, George Floyd life mattered. And I know when we met Nichelle Nichols doing the filming, she knew about Trayvon Martin. And I just was blown away that she kept up with the news and she knew about Ferguson and this type of stuff because it matters to her. And that's, I think that's where she did a lot of the things she did, because she understood that we have the right to have freedom and equality in this lifetime, not just 300 years away.
And that's something I really picked up from Nichelle in this film particularly, is that these things about having equality, and something that was said on the podcast, I think Sue from Women at Warp said this, she was quoting someone else, that that in diversity without inclusion is tokenism. And I think that that Nichelle was so passionate about having true inclusion that it wasn't just that it isn't just philosophical for her. It isn't, but it's also, it's very personal for her, that she sees this, that she looks at other people as human beings to whom she is necessarily intimately connected. And I think that sort of compassion is so fundamental.
Now, I agree. And I thought what you said was profound. Diversity without inclusion is tokenism. And, you know, it was really deep as you looked at the documentary and you really came to understand the roles people play, to have not just a Black person as third in command and the hierarchy on the Enterprise, but to have a woman third in command. It spoke volumes without even having to have a word uttered. Just the fact that she was the chief communications officer and you had this woman of color in that role. It talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when you think about DEI today, that all corporations talk about and everything, they understand that it is just tokenism. If I'm just putting Black people in to say I got Black people, I'm putting Hispanic people in or Asian people. No, it's like Dr. King said, judge me by the content of my character. Give us a chance and we can be just as good as anybody else. Just like they were saying in the NASA program, give us a chance. If you just give us a chance, we can show you that we're as good as anybody else. And I always like what Reverend Jesse Jackson says. He would say, they said, well, if you let Blacks and Hispanics into Major League Baseball, it'll bring down the quality of the game. When the truth of the matter is, we did not know how good baseball could be until we let everybody play. And that's what Nichelle is saying. We didn't know just how much we can achieve in the NASA program until you let everybody come in.
That's right. That's right. Because, you know, and I believe that so strongly that, you know, we talk about the image of God being reflected in human beings, but the scriptures also say that the body of Christ isn't supposed to be all one eye or all one hand or all one foot, but that all the parts have to work together. And I think that the image of God is really reflected in humanity, in all of humanity, in all of its variety, in all of its beauty, because God created us to be a great variety and to be a great diversity of people, to work together and to bring our differences together, to celebrate those differences and to move forward together. I think that's a great point. Mike, do you have anything you want to add? I know we don't have Benjamin much longer. Do you have anything that you would like to ask him?
I love what you said in some of the supplementary materials about giving credit to people who open doors. I think that's, and I hadn't quite realized the how much Nichelle Nichols had opened doors for people until I saw this film. So I think this documentary just really does a great service in bringing that to light for more people. I'm just so grateful to all of you for putting it together.
Yeah. I'll just say great group of individuals here who understood the importance of the civil rights aspects of Nichelle and knew that that was just as important, and highlighting that as it was talking about, her groundbreaking role on Star Trek. The other thing I would simply say is this, and I don't know David and Tim and Todd. I'm always doing stuff, Mike and Kevin, on these cases, whether it's George Floyd or Breonna Taylor. And unfortunately, my work in fighting for civil and human rights is going too much. I wish it would slow down where they would not continue this pattern of racism and discrimination. But one thing that I'm working on, and it's starting to make the news now, and it's actually a feel-good story in many regards. David, the Norman High School girls basketball team in Oklahoma. Tim, I don't know if you heard about this, but these young ladies, 7 blacks and 5 white girls, were high school students on the basketball team, and they started taking knees to protest racism and discrimination. And these are all 15, 16-year-old young women. And at the game in the state tournament, they took a knee, and a commentator who had a hot mic used a terrible racial slur at them, said, "Look at the effing N-words." And it was caught on mic. It has since went viral. And so with the NAACP Oklahoma and the parents of all of the girls, they had us come and demand that this person and his company lose their contract to commentate on high school sports forever in the state of Oklahoma, because you can't have that kind of disgusting mentality when you're around young people, especially when these young girls are doing something so incredibly courageous, talking about profiles and courage. Mm-hmm. And it immediately made me think about Nichelle Nichols taking a stand, even when you didn't have to do so, but you chose to do so because it's the right thing to do. And now you have people like LeBron James, Vice President Kamala Harris, everybody championing these young girls for taking a knee and using their voice to try to make their world better in the future. And on top of all of that, the reason it's such a feel-good story is they went on to win the state tournament. After that happened Friday, and they played all the way to Sunday and won the championship. So it's stuff like that that you need inspiration in the world. And I think Nichelle Nichols is such an inspiration for so many young women and people who just felt marginalized. And all of us could feel marginalized at a certain point. But you say, even though people are trying to marginalize me, I'm going to continue to let this little light of mine shine. And boy, that's what Nichelle Nichols did her whole life, let her light shine.
Amen. Absolutely. Lawyers make good preachers.
And preachers make good lawyers.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Are you about out of time, Benjamin?
I am.
Okay. I thought so.
Really appreciate it. Yeah. And
okay.
Fellas, let's keep blazing trails and letting people know about the force of nature Nichelle Nichols is.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Benjamin. We really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to be with us tonight. We really appreciate you coming. It's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah. God bless you. Love you all.
God bless you. Live long and prosper.
Yes, sir.
That was nice. Okay.
So right. I want to say something about Ben and Nichelle. So shortly after we assigned that we got Nichelle on board, she suffered a stroke.
Oh, wow.
Ben is in her long-term memory. Some of us are not.
Oh,
So Ben makes so she knew his clients, she knew him. So yeah, he was in her long-term memory. I just wanted to share that. That's how important he was to her.
oh, that's so sweet. That's wonderful. Boy.
Well, and when one of the things, when I first was talking to Ben, because he does great work. He shoulders a very, very heavy load. I mean, he's there making bad actions have consequences, and by doing that, you have less bad actions in the future. But in talking, about the story and the idea of getting involved in this project, one of his key things was, I want to help put something out there that's inspirational, that helps shows kids who might be tempted who might get pulled off on the wrong track because of poverty or things going on in their neighborhood or other things, to have a vision about what is possible in their future. So, and to a certain extent, I think we all kind of feel that we're trying to figure out how to continue Nichelle's mission of, representation leads to identification leads to imagination leads to execution.
Yeah, right on. And that's a really important part of it. It's a really important thing. And what I love about this film, and I've thought this several times, is that it's an inspirational film, but not in the sense that is often talked of when you think of inspirational. Inspirational is often like, oh, well, they said some really nice things that make you feel good, and maybe God was mentioned or something like that. But I feel like this is a film about somebody who's doing a hard work against difficult odds, not letting that knock her down, coming at that as a person of color, as a woman, and not thinking that those are liabilities in any way, but thinking this makes me uniquely in a position to be an advocate. This makes me uniquely in a position to do something, and taking that kind of real action. That is actually truly inspiring, because that's someone who can show you, hey, this isn't just like this flight of fancy. This isn't, sunshine and rainbows. This is a real hard, but possible thing that you can do. And that wherever you are in your life, there are ways that you can have a voice and that you can do so. And it makes you look for something practical and real to do in the real world, instead of just have nice ideas.
Yeah, that's a good. I was going to jump in too when Ben was speaking. It sparked something in me, like, for as important as it was for Nichelle to be on television in the 60s and the role that she's in, I feel like this film, Woman in Motion, now today, hopefully equally inspires as many people learning about her and learning about her mission and the struggles she faced and what her goals were and how much she achieved in such a short period of time. And I really want people to walk away, feeling inspired and feeling like I can do that too. I don't need to be an actress. I don't need to be a movie star or celebrity. I can do it even in the smallest way and make a huge impact on somebody's life.
Yeah. And that's beautiful and a powerful thing. And I feel like it feeds in so much to, it's just great that you had Ben Crump involved in this, and just that he is one of those people who's out there doing real hard practical things to actually make a difference in the world. To spin a little more off of what Dave said earlier with his talking stick, Greg, as a pastor, being involved in this project, how do you view that element of things? How do you view the importance of this kind of work?
Well, I appreciate the question. It started with me, with my father, who's a United Methodist minister, and he walks the walk, in my mind, of equality and standing up for the downtrodden and trying to walk in the other person's shoes. And I was fortunate enough to represent the survivors of a massacre in Florida called Rosewood which happened in 1923. It's something Ben and I have spoken about a lot, and we were able to get a movie made based on this awful event. And because part of the story and the modern side of it was the survivors were awarded reparations by the state of Florida because they were able to prove that state actors were involved in the massacre, including the deputy sheriff. And a lone white man kind of turned the tide on the witnesses by coming forward for the first time in the historical record. Really contemporaneously, he testified to the legislature that he was there and he saw the state actors involved in the massacre because one of them was his own father. And it's an amazing story, and it was so emotional for me to represent the survivors of the massacre, who were all grown-up children by then, and their relatives, a family about 300 descendants, were my clients. And not only was that an honor, but it was also very sad to me because, you just open your eyes and you see the same thing happening now, just in different ways. And so we've come a long way, and we have a long way to go. I'm a white man. I can't know what Ben goes through as an African-American male, but I can try to relate to him. So when we look at our film and we look at Nichelle and we look at that incredible example she has made and still does or gives to us, it inspired me to dig in and really kind of enjoy as you have said so many times, and I know you've written a book about it, the gospel of Star Trek. A lot of what Roddenberry wrote about and inspired were stories that showed that if we lift up someone else, we ourselves are lifted up, So why not do that? Why not do the right thing in that sense? And of course, as Christians, we're called to recognize and be grateful for God's creation, and God created infinite diversity. So let's celebrate that, of course, So to me, it was really a great sort of comprehensive dive into Star Trek, into the lore. I've been a fan since I was an early teenager. When I saw it in syndication, I stood in line for Star Trek, the motion picture, in college, and had a trivia argument with someone in that line, and whatever that was, 78 or whatever that was, and cheered every time the names came up in the opening credits. I mean, it was just, I love Star Trek. And so being able to be involved in this film in particular, and having that sort of my own legacy of trying to help in the little I could in the civil rights struggles that folks have, and the struggle for equality, period, and continuing to recognize that it lifts us all up, has been really a pleasure. And my partners have lifted me up in this journey.
It sounds like you come from a basis in your faith journey that and in your heritage that emphasizes the beauty and the value and the dignity of all humans.
That's right.
That's not always something we see in the air quotes Christian world. It can make a lot of people, and I know there are some of our listeners out there who may feel this way. A lot of us have become very disenfranchised, very disenchanted, very disconnected from a lot of the church world as we know it over things like this. Is there hope out there for those people? Is there hope out there for I think for the world of people of faith to move past that and grow?
I think so. I hold on to optimism. Some might say it's easier for me than others, but I believe strongly that if we can, and those in our church try to do this, our pastor is 36 years old. He's a dear friend of mine. He's our senior pastor, that is, and I've been the youth pastor. I'm now the worship leader at the church, and we believe strongly that we should try not to allow these sort of knocks on Christianity or the structure of Christianity or religion itself to get in the way of someone's own faith journey. And if someone wants to discover things about Christianity, and of course for us, it's ultimately salvation, our job, our calling is to get out of the way and to just be human and to just do good things and be loving and be accepting and be open and not be judgmental and not all the other cliche things that the church is often known for. And growing up in the church as a preacher's kid, one thing I didn't want to be was a preacher because I saw it was so hard, you know, and my mother was a choir director. My dad was a preacher. So I went to law school. I joked around. I said, people asked, are you a preacher? Do you want to become a preacher? I said, no, I'm a lawyer. I work for the other guy, you know. And my dad hates that joke, but and so my work for the church is volunteer most of the time, and yet I have been ordained. I'm an ordained deacon. I'm proud of that. I've conducted a couple of funerals, a couple weddings, and of course helping with worship, and all of that I believe it cannot be a substitute for one-on-one discourse where you just talk about someone's goals, someone's abilities, someone's struggles, Christian, not Christian, whatever faith journey or no faith journey. I have atheist friends. We discuss deep stuff all the time, and I respect that, and I welcome that, because it's so important not to give the impression that either you're better than someone else or you're judging them. That to me is poison, you know?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things that you bring to mind. You talk about being ordained and all that. And I think that's wonderful. Something that I carry over from my Baptist heritage is the priesthood of the believer.
Yes.
I really believe that everybody can minister and everybody should minister. But the other side of that is also that from my later development in faith is the false dichotomy between the sacred and the secular. That all goodness is God's goodness, all truth is God's truth, and all beauty is God's beauty. We say it all the time on this show. So I would just like to say to you that you very much, in fact, do not work for the other guy. I think that what you're doing, as long as you're working for human dignity and working for the good of your neighbors, I believe that's sacred work, and I commend you for it. So
thank you, brother. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Well, and I commend all of you actually for the work that you've done on this film, because I really believe this film is something sacred. I think this film is something beautiful and good and true, and it's an inspiring story, like I said, in the best sense, and I think so many people don't recognize that when you're making a documentary, you do have to tell a story. You don't just relay facts, that you have to have a narrative. And that narrative draw in the film is so strong and so good. I was moved to tears multiple times by this movie. And it's because it's just that pure. It's just that, and in a very genuine way. And I appreciate that greatly, that you were able to strike that tone. And Tim, can you give us a little bit of insight into where you fit in that whole process and how you came along? And because we know a little bit about how you helped start the project, how did your role develop as you moved forward?
Well, I did a lot of the interviews. I did most of the interviews, but I did a lot of the NASA liaison, whether for location or for astronauts. I was the astronaut wrangler. And to give Todd and Dave great credit, Dave really worked on the narrative, and Todd really worked on the emotional points. And Todd was determined we were going to make a cinematic documentary. And so I helped both of them do that. But I mean, it was very conscious that we're going to have a strong narrative and a strong cinematic feel. And it wasn't to be showy, it was to convey the importance and the emotional impact of the content.
Well, and I appreciate you. This is a great group of people to talk to, because you all shine the light on each other, and I really love that. I think that's a sign of a good collaboration. But I don't think you were in the room, as it were, when I said, since you did conduct a lot of the interviews, that the interviews that you conducted for this film were done with such humanity and such a genuineness of spirit. You know, I come from a video production and film background, and so I know a lot of, I mean, not experientially on the level you guys have done, but I know a lot of what it takes to set up these interviews, to go to all these places, to light it right, to connect with the person in the right way, to ask the right questions, to have the right conversation, to make them comfortable, and then all of that editing, I mean, just wading through all that footage. But I just want to commend you particularly on the way you conducted these interviews, because that's a skill that not everybody has. And being able to get people to tell their story in that way is a really valuable and precious thing. And I appreciate you for doing it so well.
Oh, thank you. And probably the most spiritual experience of the movie for me was when we did the Martin Luther King III interview, because it was in Ebenezer Baptist Church.
Oh, yeah.
And I was the first one to arrive. We all arrived on planes at different times. I was the first one to arrive. And they play his speeches on a loop in the church. And we had to film once it was closed. And the odd thing now about Ebenezer, the church, is that it's a federal park. So
Really?
when you go through the door, you're greeted by a guy in the forest ranger outfit, the green with the brown hat, and you're in a church.
Huh.
Fascinating.
So after you get over that, you're then in a very sacred spot. You're in his church and they're looping his speeches. And we came and we set up while there were still tourists going through. And then they turned off the music and they turned off the sound. And then we started the interview and the sun started coming through the stained glass windows and Todd was there and Benjamin Crump was there. And all of a sudden I realized, okay, I'm here with Martin Luther King III and Benjamin Crump in MLK's church.
Yeah, it was a very special moment. You know, we've interviewed 60 people, but that one definitely stands out for me as well. It was good because you know, while we're setting up, you just get to sit quiet and just. I mean, it's almost like it's a subconscious thing, but you force yourself just to sit there and just absorb the noise in the room, which is just his voice. And you close your eyes and you feel like you're at a Sunday service. You can hear people sneezing and coughing, and the recording is just really amazing. And then I don't know, Tim, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a mother and daughter, I think, or two sisters that were sitting like in our shot where we were going to set up. And so I had to politely ask them if they could move to a different pew. And I said, if you guys hang out for a little bit, I'll make it worth your while. And then, you know, within 5-10 minutes, MLK III walks in and their mouths both like dropped to the floor. So it was a pretty cool moment. He's such an amazing guy, just very sweet, very humble, and just very well spoken.
And there was a lot of the interview we did not use. And it was very moving because at one point, he never uses the word assassinate, it's murder. And so it becomes very much about a son whose father was murdered. And it was just the whole experience was very moving.
That is beautiful and amazing. And I mean, you know, you want to talk about somebody who really saw that the gospel is about equality. I mean, you don't have to look much further than Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, my goodness. What a moment, what a time, what a gift to be able to do all this and to be able to be in those places and speak to all these people and tell this story. And I got to say, you know, you talked about how Nichelle is telling these stories and the different people are telling these stories. One of the things we commented about on our show, on our last episode when that we talked about this film, was when Nichelle told her Martin Luther King Jr. story. Now, as a Star Trek fan, I've heard that story I don't know how many times, to the point where it's almost like, oh, Nichelle's on. Is she going to tell the MLK story? Yeah, she's going to tell the MLK story. All right, I'll wait. You know, I've heard it a lot. I mean, it's a great story, but I've heard it a lot. But the way it was told in this film is probably the best way I've heard it told, because you layered it with all these different voices carrying the narrative and all these different clips of Nichelle and other people telling the story. And I know from my work, the skill it takes to layer that, to lay that story out and stitch it together through all these different perspectives to pick exactly which words each person is going to say. And I mean, you did a lot. You know, you could have just put the camera on Nichelle and let her tell it, because that would be great. But there's something about spreading it out the way you did that was just really profound for me as someone who's heard that story a lot of times. And that was one of those moments, one of many moments in this film where I said, man, this is well made. Because that's beautiful and tedious work.
Yes, it is. And we had seen it said so many times too on many interviews. And the last time we saw it, the story being told was on Drunk History. We
oh, no kidding.
Not to do that, yes.
Oh
my goodness.
I'm not sure I want to
Kevin,
go seek
Kevin,
that
you
out.
mentioned, I heard in your review, Kevin, you mentioned sort of lamenting about us not playing more of Whoopi Goldberg and perhaps her
Yes.
story and her inspiration, obviously from Nichelle, and then of course her involvement with Star Trek, which was awesome. Todd, do you want to comment on why we, besides the clearance issues that of course I'm the one dealing with along with my partners, but Todd, do you want to comment on that at all about to the extent we didn't use any more of Whoopi Goldberg?
I mean, there were just scheduling conflicts, and this was a 4.5-year journey, just getting all these interviews in the can, and a lot of times there were scheduling conflicts. A lot of times we were, trying to raise funds. I mean, it kind of ran the gambit. But I don't know. The thing I walked away with most was just to have faith really in the process, and faith that everything's going to work out the way it is. I mean, Whoopi and people like Mae Jemison. I mean, we of course aspired to have sit downs with both of them in particular, President Obama as well. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. But then in retrospect, you find a way to include them in the film. But then it just works out. It just works out so much better, the way it is now. I think because another good example is Bill Shatner. We of course wanted to sit down and talk to him about the iconic kiss scene, but this was Nichelle's movie, and for the same reason why we didn't release and weren't ready to release when Star Trek had its 50th anniversary. That was a disappointment for us, maybe for a millisecond, and then we quickly realized, what, this isn't a Star Trek film. This is a film about Nichelle. This is a film about diversity and civil rights and the important role that she played. And had it been released during that time, had Bill Shatner been in the movie, it might have changed things. It might have changed the formula. And we baked a perfect cake here in a lot of ways. And you mess with that balance, and you might not have the same movie.
Yeah, that's very true. And I mean, I've learned that in my own journey, and particularly also as an author. I released my first Gospel According to Star Trek book in the 50th anniversary year, and I had it all laid out to do a book a year after that, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, because they all had anniversary years just right in a row, and I was just going to release a book and that just didn't happen. And the podcast really grew out of that. And I wouldn't have this podcast probably without that process of not getting those books out. Those books are going to be better books. They're going to be different books because of the time and because of who I became on the journey. And I feel like the journey that went into the making of this film was the right journey. It's just, you do a project sometimes and it just hits. It just hits. And this is one of those ones that I can see the love, I can see the care, I can see the years and the time and the patience and the diligence that went into it. And it really pays off. It really pays off, I think. And what you've got here isn't just a really good movie about Nichelle Nichols. It's a really great, I think, a gift to anybody who needs a great uplifting story, but certainly to people who are fans of Nichelle, people who are fans of NASA, people who are fans of Star Trek. I think it's a beautiful gift, and I'm really glad you made it. Thanks for that.
Appreciate it.
No, I think we need to go back and really sort out whose idea was it to make this movie in the first place thing, and get it and have the Gospel According to Star Trek be the definitive place where that no.
I'll sort it out for you now, Dave. Whose idea it was to make the movie? It was God's idea. So there, I win.
There you go. You win. No, I just want to say I really appreciated the review and discussion you had on the film. I thought that, we've gotten a lot of positive reviews, and people do appreciate the film, but it seemed like you guys really were seeing into the intentionality behind what we were trying to craft. So I was very yeah, thought it would be a wonderful thing to have a follow-on discussion with the production team and have them talk about how all that came together. So, thank you very much for your attention and thank you for your insight.
Well, thank you, Dave.
Wow.
We were talking earlier about people who open doors, and you opened the door for this whole thing to happen. So for this interview here today to happen, and we really appreciate that so much. Appreciate you reaching out to us. It meant a lot.
Yeah, we appreciate the attention as well. And I just want to throw one thing.
Yeah.
Just for my closing words. I mean, my personal wish for this film is that as many of the millions of Star Trek fans in the world that there are, I mean, get to really sit down and enjoy this film, because it's not so much about mass distribution, it's about getting this message out there. And I mean, one of the most profound moments for me shooting, it was in Nichelle's house. I was sitting behind the monitor, listening to the questions being asked, kind of flipping through to see what was coming next. I was, half engaged, if you will, in what was being said in the moment. But she said something, and like the hair on my arm stood up, and immediately I focused in on the monitor. And like what she says in this movie is the blueprint, the very simple blueprint for how we need to treat each other as human beings, how we need to be with each other as brothers and sisters to resolve all of our problems here on Earth, if we're ever to look to go back to the moon or Mars and beyond. I mean, and it's not complicated, but it's in the film. And when she said it, like, it was definitely God, like, telling me, like, this is why you're making this movie. And this was our first round of interviews. So this was like early on in the process. It became very clear, what this movie was about outside of, historical retelling of her mission and her accomplishment. So, it's my personal wish that, as many people hear about this film and take the time to watch this film, because, we learn by example, and the answer is inside this film for us and as human beings. So I just hope that as many people as possible get the chance to see this and enjoy it and really walk away with a feeling of inspiration and understanding.
That's beautiful. May I ask what it was that Nichelle said?
Got to watch the movie.
I already have.
So I would like to say that the true lesson I learned from Nichelle was about your intention. If your intention is good, good things will happen. If your intention is not that good, you will not succeed. But the other thing that absolutely impressed me was how smart she is and was, that, we have documentation of her spending hours on the phone with some of the most brilliant men of the 20th century. I mean, Gene Roddenberry and, Jessica von Puttkamer and, and Nobel Prize winners that she was so smart, she could engage these people for hours. And the other thing that impressed me more than anything, she had a business partner, but she did most of the recruiting on her own. Her partner was back at the office, but she did this on her own, and also went into places in the South where I can't believe she did that by herself. And I just cannot believe the strength, her intelligence, and her beauty. I mean, it was just amazing, and she used all of them at different times.
Yeah.
One of the things about doing this and working with Nichelle is we could never get her to talk smack. She was always positive. There was kind of that clip where she had the conversation at the university, and I'm kind of convinced it was Florida A&M University, where the professors were saying, NASA's using you. And she says, yes, and I'm using them, and I'm going to use you. And there was some of that conversation with Alan Bean and some of that frank conversation in the NASA headquarters. But by and large, everything in public was very positive. It was optimistic. It was, this is the future. This can be part of your future. You need to be a part of it. Spaces for everyone. and was the broad message, and history needs you was the message to the potential recruits. The other thing, there was her entire, she did STEM stuff over 50 years, as in a lot of it mixed in with everything else she was doing. But in that 4-month period, she not only touched the people who wound up sitting down and filling out the astronaut application, she touched hundreds of thousands of people that saw the public service announcements, that saw the interviews, that saw the ads in the magazine, that were touched by a really intense public relations campaign, and said, that's the future and I can be part of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the biggest thing, and we can never know how big it was, or how many people came into NASA or the space industry or just sciences or engineering who might have felt prior to that message being delivered, not having part of that, their imagination and their intentionality. But that's probably where the biggest impact was. And there's no way to know, but I think we're living in a future that she helped create, and we just wanted to say thank you.
And you did in a big way, and I think the film honors her, and it honors the whole journey that all of these people went on, and it's a beautiful thing.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you all
Thank
so
you.
much.
It has indeed. It has
Great
indeed.
to listen to you.
All right. Well, that was a heck of a conversation.
It was an amazing conversation.
Yeah, I think it was a major privilege to be able to have all those folks on the show. So next week we have my second conversation with Sue from Women at Warp.
That'll be amazing too.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. I enjoyed your first conversation with her, and I'm glad she's coming back to talk some more with you.
Yeah, it's going to be really great. We're going to talk a little bit more about Women at Warp, but also we're going to talk about Sue's personal story as a self-described ex-evangelical, and her background both as a pastor's kid and as a Star Trek fan, and more about women in Star Trek. So check it out. It's going to be really cool. It's going to be a great way to continue this month's ongoing theme, Women's Future History. So I hope you will join us for that. And in the meantime, please like, share, comment, rate, and subscribe. And be sure to send us your questions. We will get back to answering those. We're Gospel According to Star Trek on Twitter and on Facebook and on Instagram. Or you can email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to discuss your question on the show. And for the first time ever, you can also support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/gospeltrekpodcast. See what kind of cool perks we have available for you there. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time,
I'm Mike Poteet.
and I'm Kevin Sinise. And as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.